Hi, my name is Brian Gren, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Oracle ZFS storage appliance image in the Oracle Cloud. That can be configured through the Oracle Marketplace, and there are three images available. You can see them on the screen here. I am going to walk through the one on the left-hand side, which is the high availability image that is available for deployment. It is a paid image, but it also includes support along with that image. So first, a little bit about myself. I am a database specialist at Oracle. I blog. My personal blog is briangren.blogspot.com. I also blog on the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure blog. Where I started with this is the question came up is why would I want to use the ZFS image in OCI? And this is an example use case of where this can be really helpful to help bring data from, let's say, an on-premise ZFS to OCI through replication. It's not a weekly full, daily incremental. It replicates the change blocks, if you understand the way ZFS works. And in this example, I have a on-premise ZFS. I set up replication. It is replicating to a ZFS image in OCI that's a highly available image. And that is bringing a copy of the data from on-premise to OCI. I'm going to walk through the configuration and setup of the ZFS image in OCI in three parts. The first part is the part I'm going to concentrate on in this video. It's going to be creating the image itself, the infrastructure image in OCI. Part two is going to be how to add storage and configure the storage on those ZFS appliances in OCI. And then the third part is going to be how to manage the networking because there are multiple networks that you would configure for clustering, for NFS mounting, for administration. So I'm going to start with the Oracle Marketplace. The place I'm starting is going into the OCI console. And on the bottom here on the hamburger menu is the Marketplace. So under Marketplace, I'm choosing all applications. And it's going to bring up all the different applications that you can install from the Marketplace. But what I'm interested in for this demo is the ZFS. So that's what I'm searching for. There are three ZFS images. The one I'm going to be installing is the middle one here, which is the high availability marketplace stack. It gives me information about the stack that I'm going to be doing. This is a high availability solution. I can do an active passive cluster, active active cluster, single head, and here is the related documentation. So the best place to start is by downloading this high availability quick start guide because there are some prerequisites. So you don't want to just go in and launch it and have it run through. There's some items that you need to do. So I have downloaded this and I'm gonna just bring it over here to my screen, kind of go through it. So this is the high availability quick start guide. Purpose, disclaimer. The first thing I think to look at here is the expectations, the different shapes that you can use for your ZFS compute instances, the maximum bandwidth, typical sustained bandwidth, number of clients. So this gives you a pretty good idea of the size of the compute image that you would choose when you are configuring this. And you can pick bare metal too, which is what the recommendation is when you are running a production system with lots of clients and lots of throughput. Bare metal is the best way to go. But for the demo, I'm just going to pick something simple. That one of the items to note on here is that the number of VNICs that you can have on your instances is dependent on the number of OCPUs. So there is a minimum number of 4 for active passive, 5 for active active. And if you find that you want to configure replication, you want to add some more VNICs because you have multiple shares that are being delivered by this ZFS image, then you may increase it from 5 to 6, 7, 8 as you go along. You can dynamically increase it, but this is the minimum that you need to start with when you create this image. This is an overview of the configuration. You get it. The marketplace stack. You configure the stack variables, apply it. From there, it's pretty straightforward, but where I want to start is the prerequisites that need to be in place in order to go through the marketplace and have that Terraform script run through and create those images for you. I kind of summarized, here's some more of the detail, but I summarized what those steps are here. So the prerequisites are to create 2 compartments. That's what the recommendation is, to separate the network and ZFS cluster instances. So I'm going to go back to my OCI here, and I did have 2 compartments that I created for what I work with. I am under bgren, under user compartments here. And within my compartment that I use for my demos, I created both of these compartments that are recommended, the Z cluster and the Z networks. So that was the first prerequisite. The second prerequisite is to create a new dynamic group. You can, call it whatever you want, but this is a dynamic group that's used to manage the 2 nodes in the cluster. So let me go back to OCI here. So under identity and security, dynamic groups, this may not be something that you immediately have access to. I had to have access granted to me for dynamic groups. But here's the group that I created. Z underscore D group, like it mentions in the documentation. The description is this is the dynamic group for the ZFS cluster. And in the documentation, it mentions that you need to have access to the compartments. So the rule that I put here that works with this installation is I need access to a compartment and I give it the compartment ID. And this compartment ID is the OCID value for the Z underscore cluster compartment. So you can see that this ends in 6F5Q. So this is what the dynamic rule is doing, is it's giving this rule access, or creating the group of all instances in this compartment that ends in 6F5Q, going back to my compartments under bgren, and I look at this cluster, and that's 6F5Q. So that does match. So that was the second thing that I needed to do, was to create this dynamic group and have that cluster be a member of that group. Then in the root compartment, I need to add policies for this dynamic group. So let me go back to the documentation here. So I need to add all of these policies in the root compartment. So I'm going to go over here, policies, under identity and security. So I need to go all the way up to the root compartment. And I created this policy, bgren, ZFS HA policy. I'm in my policies now, and I'm going to edit them. Click the edit policies. When I go into the advanced, I can edit the individual policies. And one thing you'll notice when you look at this is in the documentation, it has the compartment as just Z underscore cluster. I do have different levels in the compartments. You see users and bgren. So in the policy statements, I put the levels in to give access to Z cluster within my compartment under the root compartment. So I worked my way down in order to get those to match. So that's what you need to do in the policy statements. The last thing that I need to do is create a new VCN. So this VCN is going to be used for that connection, that private cluster connection between the two nodes in my HA cluster. And this VCN also needs to have a service gateway defined. So I'm going to go down to back my OCI console. I'm going to go to networking, virtual cloud networks, and I'm going to go down to this V underscore or Z underscore cluster. And you can see that I did create a new VCN here. Since I already ran this, it did create a subnet, but this was a new VCN that was empty. It has a CIDR of 10.1.0.0/16. I also created the service gateway because that's the next prerequisite. So I created a service gateway within this VCN. The service gateway will be able to communicate with all services. Let me bring this up. So it goes out to all IAD services in the Oracle Services Network so that it can communicate out to the storage and the two nodes can communicate with each other. And then the last thing that I did is when I created the VCN, it created the default routing table, but I needed to put an entry in this default routing table so that it could talk to this service gateway. You'll see that there is a rule. Target type is the service gateway. Destination is all services. And it is going to the service gateway that I created. So those are the prerequisites that need to be in place in order to go to the marketplace and run through and create the image. The other thing to mention is that along with the VCN that was created for that private interconnect cluster networking, I also have my normal VCN. So within the compartment here under my name, I've got the normal VCN that I use, and I do have subnets that are already configured that I use for other instances. And I was able to leverage those for my ZFS cluster for some of the other things. So one of the things that I leveraged is I have ZFS admin. So this is the subnet that I use for any administration communications. So this subnet actually has internet access so that I can have some of the instances have a public IP and I can connect to them outside of OCI. The other one that I was using is this shared NFS storage one, which is the subnet that I use to NFS attach the ZFS storage to any of the instances that I have. So I make sure that any of the instances that I create, like database instances, have an admin network so that I can connect to them through a public IP, and then they would connect to the ZFS storage or whatever NFS storage through this second subnet. And that's going to be important when I go through the marketplace to create that cluster, that ZFS cluster. Now that I have my prerequisites ready, I'm going to go to the marketplace. Search for the ZFS again. choose the stack, and now I'm ready to launch the stack. The location that I want to put this as the compartment is this Z underscore cluster. So the two nodes are going to go in their own compartment. And like I showed you previously, that compartment also contains the VCN that is going to be used for that private interconnect traffic. So I'm going to go out here. I'm going to launch the stack. I'm just going to leave the marketplace stack name the same. Description. I'm not changing anything on this screen, but this is where I need to enter variables as far as how I want to configure the cluster as I go. So I can choose active passive, active active, or single head. I've chosen active active. The compute instance shape, these are the choices that I can pick here. I'm staying with the default here, the flexible one. But since I am using an active active, like I said earlier, is the VCNs, those network VNICs, sorry, the VNICs are dependent on the number of OCPUs. So this needs to be at least 4. Because I want to set up possibly another one, I'm going to change this to 6. I give the storage a name, so this name is attached to the storage when it creates that, and it's going to allow me to identify it. The storage I am putting in that same compartment. So the instances, compute instances are going in this Z underscore cluster compartment, and the storage is going in that same Z underscore cluster compartment. I'm picking a availability domain. I'm in Ashburn, so there's 3 availability domains. And fault domains within those availability domains. And what you'll notice is that the fault domain is different for the primary and the secondary. So by default, it is going to configure those compute instances in 2 different fault domains. So now for the cluster networking, this is where I said that you need to have that new VCN that is used for the private interconnect. So I am going out to Z underscore cluster, and I am choosing that VCN that I created for this. And I need to give it a CIDR block because it is going to create a new subnet for me. I'm doing -24, which is going to give me 255 IP addresses. I probably don't have to go that wide. I can narrow it down because it's just going to be used for the traffic between these 2 nodes. The next thing is the admin network. And as I said, I have a VCN that I already created that I use for my admin network for my other compute instances. And within that, I'm choosing my admin network. I can set specific IP addresses within that subnet if I wanted to, but I'm just going to let it default. The other choice that I need to make here is for the attachment of the NFS mounts. And as I said, I also have a subnet that I use for that, the shared NFS storage. How many blocks for primary and secondary, and the size of those blocks. So those are going to be automatically attached. I can adjust this right now, or I can go back and I can do the storage later. But this is by default going to give me 2 block volumes on each head, and those block volumes are going to be 1 terabyte apiece. So let me go back and review. So I'm doing an active-active cluster with this instance shape. 6 CPUs. I'm calling it ZFS HA. I'm putting it in the Z cluster compartment. I have my cluster networking, which is that new VCN, which has that service gateway defined. I'm giving it the CIDR for the subnet. I'm giving it the admin network, the network where I want it to attach the NFS to. the data volumes, and then the last thing is my SSH key. So I have a key that I use for all of my instances. The next screen is going to give you the information from the variables. So it's going to give you more detail about everything that it's filled in from what you gave it. And then you hit create and it's going to be off and running. I'm going to stop at this point because I did run through this once. And then once this is done successfully, we can go out and take a look at what it created. I ran this previously and I didn't show you what that looks like while it's running, but it was successful. And I'm looking here at the instances that it created. So as I went through this, I used the ZFS HA for the names. It created a and a B. So these are the two compute instances it put in the Z underscore cluster compartment where I told it to. When I click on A, I can see A has two sets of block volumes that are available. There's two volumes for A, two volumes for B. I look at the attached VNIC and I could see that the primary VNIC is the cluster VNIC. The NFS shared one, I see that there are two VNICs for failover that are out here based on the VNIC information and subnet information that I gave it. And then here is the subnet for the admin. So I'm going to take a look out here. So this is the subnet that did get created as part of the install. And that subnet is within the Z underscore cluster. So before I ran through this, I created the VCN. That Terraform script actually did create this subnet for me, and it does have the CIDR block that I told it to create. And it is a private subnet. This subnet cannot be used to access the internet directly. It's just used for communication between those two cluster nodes and communication with the storage. The last thing to show you on this is the storage itself. The storage was created as volume groups. So when I go out here and look at it, there's two volume groups. The storage that is attached to the A node is grouped as a volume group. The storage connected to the B node is also a storage group. And here I see the block volumes. The final thing that I'm going to do out here is I did go out to these instances. And let me go to the first one. The next step, if you look in the documentation, is to set the password for the OPC user and the root user. And you do that by connecting to this IP. So you look at the admin ADM-A. And when I look at that, view details, I can see this IP address. So I want to connect to this IP address within OCI through SSH using that key, set the OPC password. I can also set the root password, and then I will be able to access the buoy for those ZFS, and I'm ready to go with them. It is not necessary to do this on both nodes. Because I access these outside of OCI also, I did go out here under IP4 addresses, edit, and by default it was set to no public IP, but for these two ADMs, one on each of the heads, I did change it to be a public IP. So once I was able to do that, I could use this IP address and connect to those heads from outside of OCI directly. And that would be after I set the passwords. So once I do all of this, I'm ready to go. I can go right into, the buoy from the public internet, and then I can manage these two ZFS heads. Took a quick pause there. I log back in, and now when I look under the configuration and I look at cluster, I can see that I do have a cluster. It's configured. The A and the B are talking to each other. I look at networking. I could see the VNICs that are attached. And I look at storage, and I do have 1.95 terabytes, so the storage is attached. So this is ready to go. So I hope this was helpful on getting you started on going through the process in the marketplace of having it install a high availability active or active passive ZFS cluster in OCI that you can use for your environment. Thank you. Place.